Batman is dead, which leaves Gotham City in need of a knight in shining armor, or perhaps several, to keep her safe from a rogues gallery of criminals, terrorists, and the corrupted. With several controversies leading up to and after the release of the game, Gotham Knights has some big shoes to fill. I generally like to start my reviews discussing the presentation of a game since it's the very first thing you notice when booting up, and in this case I was greeted to an over 10-minute cutscene that helps set the stage for the events in motion. In this cutscene, it became immediately apparent that this is some new interpretation of the Batverse with its own tone and aesthetic. The visuals seem to be locked at 4K, which really stands out in certain moments while feeling a bit lackluster in others. To many, the more important thing to talk about is frame rate. As many of you who have been following this game already know, this title is locked at 30 frames per second. To my untrained eyes, Gotham Knights appears to usually hover somewhere in the 20s, so well below many players' 60 FPS expectations. Making games is hard and unpredictable, and so I always try to keep an open mind to the why behind decisions, especially considering I'm just some guy playing the game. But with all of that in mind, I struggle to understand why there can't be some sort of single-player mode that could have reduced the resolution and turned off ray tracing to try to hit a higher frame rate, especially in context to the single-player experience. Again, I'm no game developer, but I am just curious to what the priorities were here. Once you get past the frame rate, the art direction is pleasant, shown throughout the city, in interior locations, and the character models themselves. The music didn't really stand out to me that much outside of the rendition of Livin' La Vida Loca. Going into this review, I made it my goal to minimize my comparisons to the Arkham games, but one area where I couldn't resist comparing the two is in the Ungotham like Gotham City, at least in contrast to Arkham Knight's rendition. This city feels like some quiet, empty, regular old city with some key landmarks placed throughout. To clarify, I actually like the design and layout of the city, with it feeling like it has a real history behind it. This world does feel like one where the developers put a piece of themselves into it. With that said, I just don't think it quite feels like Gotham to me. Whether it's Arkham Knight or other forms of Batman media, this interpretation of the iconic city feels clean and empty in comparison. Expectations often lead to disappointment, but when it comes to a Batman game, I'm expecting dark, rainy, filthy streets infested with unsavory characters surrounded by very Gothic-inspired architecture. This Gotham feels more like a quieter and cleaner neighboring city across the pond. This is very subjective, of course, but I think I would have clicked more with this particular city if only it didn't carry the burden of my expectations to what I believe a Gotham City is supposed to be. Navigating through the city doesn't quite feel as good as it sounds on paper, but isn't necessarily bad either. Each character primarily depends on their grapple hook and respective bat cycle to get around. Grappling up and across buildings feels so-so. There's a lack of momentum and engagement that begins to feel stale when solely relying on this means of transportation. The bat cycle is the fastest way to get around, but is also missing a feeling of engagement due to a perceived lack of speed with almost no relationship to the environment. There are little to no stakes or thrills to be found here. You can't crash into cars, ride on top of buildings, fall off the bike, or cause any sort of environmental damage. One could argue that the Bat family are just a bunch of good Samaritans, but I sure didn't have any issues running down or shooting pedestrians. After some in-game progression, each character unlocks their form of gliding, which does help jazz up getting around. Each of these traversal systems feel that they just need some touch-up with refined physics. I also feel there should have been more of an emphasis placed on blending each mode of transportation seamlessly together, like other superhero games have successfully done in the past. Like most open-world narrative games, when you aren't traversing through the map, you're usually engaging with enemies. The combat here is a bit of a mixed bag where opinions may vary somewhat from person to person. You have short and long attacks, dodging mixed in with some grappling. When in the heat of the moment, it can be quite satisfying to pull off a perfect dodge to an incoming attack followed up with your own well-timed strike. However, the balance between offense and defense isn't a perfect marriage. Defense is basically just dodging, which doesn't feel very dynamic, especially the more you have to depend on it as enemies get tougher. The combat in the Arkham games were held together by the counter button, allowing combat to flow. I feel the addition of a counter and a block input could have helped spice up the monotony here. Just throwing ideas around, what if each character defended differently on top of their being already able to dodge? Nightwing could bob and weave, Red Hood would have a traditional block and parry system, maybe Batgirl could perform throws, and Robin would just time counters. Just kind of spitballing ideas over here, but what I am saying is I just feel like there isn't enough push and pull going on. Technically, throwing is already an option within this game's grapple tree. This tree includes throwing, clinch strikes, chokes, and the occasional interrogation. Most of these actions look cool, with chokes probably being the most utilized. These chokes, otherwise known as silent takedowns, are essential to the stealth side of things. Overall, I would say a lot of the animations look top-notch and brutal, whether it's a finisher or a takedown. The main issue with combat is the enemies. It takes two to tango for satisfying combat. The first problem I have here is the time to kill. These enemies soak up a ridiculous amount of damage. Once you figure out how the UI works, you can upgrade your suits to divvy out more of a beating, but it becomes a tricky balancing act just to get the TTK feeling right. This is most apparent as Red Hood when shooting the same enemy in the head repeatedly. I'm pretty sure a BB gun could take someone out quicker. I guess this is the price of Batman's no-kill policy. Well, unless you count assisting someone off of a ledge. Bosses are the worst offenders here, requiring ungodly amounts of damage to beat. Most of these encounters boil down to swapping back and forth between spamming the dodge and attack button for what often felt like hours. I got so tired of these sections I would often turn down the difficulty to very easy to speed up the process, which by the way is the other way you can decrease your time to kill. The second big issue here that brings things full circles is the abundance of enemy ranged attacks. Later encounters in the game boil down to dodge, 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 attack, dodge, 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 attack, which is only amplified by the TTK and the lack of defensive options. In the Arkham games, a room full of armed men would border on impossible head-on, which forced players to embrace the shadows. The stealth here can be fun at times, but I feel there just wasn't enough of an investment made to flesh out this pillar of gameplay. The interior locations leave a lot to be desired in regards to environmental manipulations and takedown approaches. The same can be said for gadgets, where there just isn't a whole lot of variety or experimentation to be found. Worth pointing out that while the open world map feels a bit undercooked, interior missions overall feel rather polished and well designed from both an art direction and a layout perspective, at least outside of not being optimized for stealth. There are some fantastic set-piece moments sprinkled throughout that gives a glimpse to what this game could have been. An important thing to mention is that I only spent a small amount of my playthrough in co-op. I personally couldn't find anyone I knew that had the game. I dabbled a little bit with a few random people online, and it was more or less what you would have expected. Having a friend by your side, even if a total stranger, does add a fun new wrinkle to combat. A quick note worth pointing out is that even if you buy the disc edition of this game and you only play alone by yourself, you still need an internet connection to start up the game. I found Gotham Knights to have an entertaining yet predictable story. To keep it spoiler-free, Nightwing, Red Hood, Batgirl, and Robin have come together as one team after the tragic death of Batman. With Batman gone, the floodgates have opened up to an assortment of criminal organizations to run amok of Gotham. Each of the four protagonists have to deal with the immediate threats in front of them while also having to cope with their recent loss. Personally, I found all the characters to be a bit trite, as if they were pulled straight out of a TVY7 kids superhero show. You have the fearless yet unconfident leader, the brooding tough guy, the resourceful tech nerd, and the wisecracking dork with the all-knowing statesman giving advice. As I've mentioned before, kinda sounds like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The more time I've spent with these characters, they did begin to grow on me, even to the point where getting to know them better became my driving motivation to complete the main campaign. The ending is a bit mixed in execution due to some predictable story beats that try to pull on my heartstrings while not feeling completely earned. There are little snippets of character development and interaction shown through triggered cutscenes. Some of these cutscenes stick the landing better than others, but as a whole they felt a bit disjointed, often conflicting with the story beats happening in the main missions. Going back to my complaints about this city's Ungotham-like atmosphere and the kids' show-like interpretation of these characters, the tone just feels off. This created universe feels juvenile and campy with PG-13 cuss words to give it some edge. Batman media has historically been known to tackle some heavy themes and stories with grace, so to see this lighter, sillier take on the iconic franchise left me a bit disappointed. Nothing that ever happens is mind-blowing or revolutionary, but I did find myself engaged with each of the 4 characters enough I wanted to see the story through. I feel like most of my criticisms of this game could have been addressed by more development time to refine and polish. Of course, with money on the line, this is easier said than done, which makes me wonder what kind of development hell did this game go through. With mediocre performance exclusive to next-gen systems, a world that doesn't feel completely filled out, traversal that feels serviceable, unbalanced combat, and a clunky UI, what would the experience have been like if given another year or two? Overall, I consider Gotham Knights to be a tricky game to review. If you go into this game expecting the next Arkham game or something that rivals a first-party Sony title in scale and narrative, then you may be a bit disappointed. Underneath the mediocre performance and clunky UI, I believe there is a fun cooperative RPG if you engage with those systems. Gotham Knights is by no means a bad game, but many of the things it sets out to do have been done before and better. I didn't spend too much time in co-op, but I think if you're able to find a friend to go through the game with you, it may be worth a try, especially once it goes on sale or pops up on Game Pass. Gotham Knights has some great ideas, but feels it was taken out of the oven too soon.
6.5.
I'd be curious to hear what any of your thoughts are if you've had a chance to play the game. Gotham Knights seems to be one of those games where you either are enjoying it or you hate it. As always, I want to appreciate you for watching, and until next time, see ya!